Okay, let's check volume. That is good. Volume is good. All is well. Okay, we've seen a lot happen in the last couple of days. Obviously, in the sport, we've seen Nico Hulkenberg have a massive accident in Abu Dhabi. Well, I wouldn't say massive. I would say it was an average accident, which could have been a lot worse considering he was hanging upside down in the car caught fire. We've seen obviously Andy Farrell be announced as the new Ireland head coach rugby union from 2019 as a good successor to Joel Schmidt. That's been announced, so there's some stability and continuity with the Irish setup, which could be terrifying for everyone else. The RFU have released uh, well, their financial figures, and it's not good. The RFU has announced it's made £35 million worth of losses in the last 12 months to 2 years. Where's that money gone? And Scotland have made the UEFA playoffs. That doesn't mean they've actually made the Euro 2020 finals, though. But yes, they have adapted better to the format of the UEFA Nations League than some other nations have. Obviously, Mick McCarthy is coming back as Ireland coach for 2 years. That's an interesting subplot considering he replaces Roy Keane and Martin O'Neill, and the history between those men. But on the rugby side of things, obviously we've had a great autumn series between all the nations. It's really good rugby played. Some really fun matches to watch, the All Blacks not being the All Blacks is a good thing, I think, for rugby. I think if the All Blacks were to win the World Cup next year, I think that would actually be more of a negative than a positive for rugby union. I don't know enough about James Forrest. The worry was at the beginning of the UEFA Nations, a couple of weeks ago, when 9 players withdrew from the Scotland squad. There were worries that, the national jersey didn't mean as much for Scottish players, or there was issues within the Scottish setup when players were, not turning up and refusing to play and dropping out of the squad. But those that have turned up have done remarkably well, and I think it's a positive. If Scottish football is to regain something and grow again and get back to the top table, it does need to do well and actually get to Euro 2020. I don't care how Scotland gets to Euro 2020, but if they don't, with the change to qualifying format, it still raises questions about the state of the sport north of the border. Yeah, it's a difficult subject to because how do I put it? Because I'm not necessarily a Scottish football fan or watch a lot of Scottish sport. I just somehow have a lot of Scottish subscribers, and I seem to know a lot about Scottish sport. But I don't watch it day in day out. I don't watch it week in week out. It's difficult to really. I don't know where Scotland sit right now. The fact they haven't qualified for a major tournament for 20 years, that's the first call of concern, that they can't qualify. So you've got to look at why. I think the SFA needs to reform itself, I think, and the English FA as well, for that matter. I think there are issues within governance of the game and the way grassroots level is governed and funded. Wow, that's really difficult. You've either got to play Finland, Serbia, or Norway. Serbia, I think, would be the strongest of the 3 teams in that grouping there. Finland haven't really had a solid national side for quite some time. Norway have declined as well over recent years, much like Scotland. They're not as good as they were on the men's side of things. They put a lot of emphasis into their women's game, and their women's team is very good in Norway, but the men's team has declined, and they're not developing the same amount of star players like they were 10, 20 years ago. So Norway are actually in a very similar position to Scotland when it comes to qualification for tournaments. Serbia obviously were at the last World Cup and had a controversial group stage. So that's going to be interesting. I would say they're average international sides. At the end of the day, you've got to beat what's in front of you. Well, this is chronic. This is what I mean. Is like, is this UEFA Nations League a good thing or a bad thing? Because unfortunately, we're not able to see it on free-to-air TV. So I don't know where the domestic Four Nations FA is what they agreed with the TV companies, because it's solely on Sky, and I think that's wrong. I do think that's wrong. And you take the peak of popularity of the sport in the UK, because the Welsh have been doing well in recent years. They got to the last Euros and got to the semi-final of the last Euros. Northern Ireland and the Republic have been at the last Euros as well. And of course, England did so well at the World Cup. There's a rise in optimism around the UK when it comes to the national sides, and you take it all away and put it on the Sky, and I think that's wrong. So we'll have to see if the qualification games, if there's any qualification games for Euro 2020, if there's any of them on the telly. But it would be a shame if, at least on the international side of things, the national games were taken away completely. We already know about the TV rights for the various leagues, and the debates about is the TV deal fair for the Championship and Football League clubs, and is the Scottish TV deal right, and the amount of money that comes out of these TV deals, and how the clubs justify the ticket prices and a variety of other things. But I don't know. There's much to debate on the state of football in Europe at the moment. There's a lot of allegations going out about corruption and failed drugs tests and breaches of financial fair play, and there's a lot of going on at club level that isn't positive. So on that side of things, it's going to be interesting to see who actually qualifies for Euro 2020, and it's the only tournament where there isn't a host nation. We just basically everyone just plays games around Europe, and Wembley gets the semi-finals and the finals. It's sort of a semi way of saying it was a British hosted tournament, but it isn't. I don't know how well the UEFA Nations League experiment has actually worked. There are those fans who seem to enjoy it more than the aimless friendlies, but still don't enjoy it as much as they could. I honestly believe, international football in between World Cups and Euros and the other major international tournaments is flawed. It needs to be competitive matches. And the club country debate, we've seen players put club over country quite a lot, and the various excuses they use, is a shambles, really. And some of the clubs say to their players and try and put pressure on the coach to say he's only playing 45 minutes. He plays any more than that, we're not releasing him. Yeah, I don't know if Hampden Park is the best stadium, or Wembley, that matter, the best stadiums for semi-finals and finals. We've seen a lot of controversy with these stadiums in the last few years, with Hampden and Wembley being in the headlines for wrong reasons. Also, I don't know how well the playing surface at Wembley is going to hold up, because obviously the NFL play a lot of games there. We've seen rugby union matches played there. Obviously, Tottenham are playing there a lot lately, and then obviously the Wembley surface is a shocking surface. Hampden, I'm not so sure about Hampden's playing surface, but there's a lot of debate about the stadiums and their use, and how long they're going to remain national stadiums, and ownership issues, and various things. It's going to be interesting seeing international competition football at Hampden. That hasn't happened for a very long time. Same with Wembley. It's going to be nice to see a tournament football take place in these stadiums for the first time, because obviously the new Wembley hasn't had tournament football, and Hampden, I think, ever has. So it's going to be nice to see an international tournament football take place in these stadiums. It's pretty much what they're designed for. But there are question marks over the future of Hampden Park. We already know that. There's question marks over the future of Wembley. We already know that. So it's going to be interesting to see the future of these stadiums long term, what happens. Obviously, all this political side of things, this Brexit thing, no one's debated and talked about what effect. Yeah, it does have a 5-star accessibility rating and has a good reputation for hosting Champions League finals. Okay, there are still question marks over the finances behind Hampden Park and the location within the city of Glasgow, with the local area. Same, I mean, obviously the plans to have the double header there, for example, were shelved at the last minute. There were criticisms of the refurb and the cost, and there are other criticisms of Hampden Park. As a stadium, it's good. But there are criticisms over the funding of it and the ownership of it, and that's more the issue, I think, with Hampden. Same with Wembley, except Wembley is a shit stadium, which is not well liked, really. I will admit, Wembley is not a loved stadium. at all. There's a lot of debate about whether the national stadium for football, rugby league, rugby union, whatever it may be, whatever sporting occasion should be moved. Twickenham as a rugby union stadium is brilliant. Rugby league, Wembley is the national stadium, but most rugby league clubs play in the north of England, so that makes no logical sense to have it there. So there is a debate about the future of Wembley post I think 2027. I think that's when the FA, I think it's when the Challenge Cup finishes its agreement, and the FA Cup we're not sure how long that's going to stay at Wembley either. But fans are regularly critical of Wembley, so we'll have to see what transpires. What else? I was going to talk about something else. Something else I was going to mention. I've forgotten. You've thrown me off. I was going to mention something. I've forgotten what it is. It will be interesting though this Euros where there's no host nation. That's the one thing that's going to be different is there's no host nation for this Euros, and this was a UEFA plan from Michel Platini. And as soon as Michel Platini was thrown out of UEFA, they went, "No, we're not going to do this again." But it's set in stone now. It's going to be interesting. Yes, Tyson Fury, Deontay Wilder. That has had an interesting build-up, but it's on BT Sports, so I can't watch it, and I don't particularly want to go to a pub to watch it either. If I'm brutally honest, I think boxing as a sport needs to look at how the TV rights are sorted out, how the sport is governed. I might have to go to the pub for a few jars. I don't really drink that much. I went to the pub last night for a couple of drinks, and I felt bored. I didn't enjoy it. I haven't really drunk much the last couple of months, and I've saved a lot of money, ironically. But when something's put only on pay per view, it's off putting, especially when it's already on a subscription sports channel and you've got to pay even more to get it. I do not understand that logic there. I really don't. But the TV rights debate is going to rage on and on, and will do so until the next batch of TV rights for various sports are put up for tender. It always raises the debating point of media rights within certain sports. I'm not going to try and predict a winner in that one. I think Tyson Fury, with what's happened to him and what he's had to go through, positive or negative, and whether you like him or not, I think he has had to go through a very difficult couple of years. Deontay Wilder, I'm open for debate on that one. I'm honestly not fast who wins really. Boxing is not a sport that I enjoy as much as I did 5-10 years ago. I do enjoy it significantly less now than I did before. There's a variety of reasons for that. What was I going to say? Oh yeah, Brexit and what it's going to do to British sport and European sport. No one's really done an impact survey really on the effects of the political and economic changes that are happening in Europe. No one's really looked at what effects Brexit will have on British sport and on sport in Europe. We know there are a lot of Brits who either play or train in Europe, depending on the sport. There's some young English football players playing in Europe right now. You've got motorsport, you've got athletics, cycling. So no one's really done an impact study on what's going to happen to the sporting landscape. Because sport is big business, and that makes a lot of money. And I think there's going to be some unintended consequences, both positive and negative. On a positive side, you're going to see more British players breaking through in the various sports in rugby union, rugby league, football, ice hockey. They're going to be getting more opportunity because those European players may find it harder to get over here to play and work. Overseas money, that might change. So wages might be suppressed. Coaches as well. There's a lot of overseas coaches here. Now, what people don't realise is non-EU nationals have to get a work permit. That's basically what is actually going to happen in the long run of things. It's just going to turn to a work permit system and a visa system, and I have no problem with that. For some reason, Europeans seem to have a problem with actually having to legally get a visa and a work permit, and they think the Schengen Agreement's a beautiful thing, which is a flawed thing. I did a video on the political side of things on my other channel. I don't know how well it's done. I haven't really looked, but it is interesting that no one's really done an impact study on how this will affect the sporting landscape. I think football is going to be the sport that's most affected because the amount of EU nationals that play and coach. So I think, yeah, football will be the most affected. I think ice hockey will be the next most affected, again, because of the amount of Czech and Slovak and German players that play in Britain. Uh, that'll be the next most affected sport when it comes to the elite league and then the lower levels of the sport with the amount of overseas players that come from Europe. But then again, if you look at the professional sports in this country, there are a lot of non-EU nationals playing, and what they have to go through is a visa system, depending on the nation they're from, and a work permit system. So while no one has publicly come out and done a Brexit study and an impact study on what it's going to do to their sport, I think the changes won't be as severe as people expect. And any changes that come from it, I think there's a positive with more young British talent getting to play at the top level. Yeah, I think the quality level may drop slightly, but there'll be more exposure for young British talent playing, and there might have to be more young British coaches coaching as well. I think that's the biggie. So we'll have to see what happens long term. We've got 4 months until what I would call D-Day. But at the end of the day, long term, it's just going to be a work permit system, visa system that's been effectively enforced with non-EU nationals forever, and no one complains about it. So I don't know. Money side of things, I don't know. But we'll have to see what happens. It's going to be a very interesting period of time. But I find it funny that not a single major sport has actually done an impact study on what's going to happen with their finances, playing quality, player development, coaching. It is really interesting to me that no one has publicly released an impact study on what it's going to do and what they think it could do to their sport, their leagues, their development systems. It is really interesting. I think some of the more minor sports, such as like cycling and athletics, could be more affected. Um, they rely heavily on training in Europe when it comes to cycling in the Alps for altitude training. Obviously, the major tours, the Giro, the Vuelta, and the Tour de France take place in Europe. So their teams that they cycle for are normally based in those countries. So cycling could be negatively affected. Football obviously is the biggest sport in Europe. There will be effects on that. But a fan travel, player transfers, that kind of thing. Rugby obviously has a big European thing as well, with European competition at club level. Super League, there are French clubs in the Super League system. So it is surprising not a single sport has come out and done a public impact study over the last two years. It really does surprise me. But we'll have to see what happens with that. You've mentioned sailing before. You have mentioned sailing before, and the UK is very good at getting medals at the Olympics with sailing. It's one of the Olympic sports that we regularly get medals at, regardless of where we are in the Olympic. Oh God! Oh shit! My bloody stand wobbling. Yeah, sailing. It just, apart from the America's Cup, it doesn't really get much attention globally. It really doesn't. It's not a sport that is high up on the list of things for companies to put their sponsorship to for TV companies to put on sports networks. It doesn't get it. I admit that. I think there's the odd bit of sailing on Free Sports and Premier Sports. Eurosport has the occasional sailing competition, but it doesn't really get a lot of press coverage outside of the as it being a minor sport. We've had obviously some great sailors like Sir Ben Ainsley, who are household names, and have grown the sport somewhat with their success and their personality alone. But yeah, it doesn't get much funding. It doesn't get much sponsorship, and that is a problem. And that's down to the Olympic Funding Committee, and where the Olympic funding, for example, and the National Lottery funding in the UK gets distributed. Other countries seem to have a better Olympic program, and seem to have a better Olympic program and how they distribute the funds from that Olympic program and a lot of it's actually purely state funding as well, out of the taxpayer. So that's an interesting debate: is the funding formula they use for Olympic sports, and sport at that kind of level where it is a minor sport. Um, I think rowing is actually in a better state than sailing. All the rowing clubs. I live near Henley, so therefore I do see a lot of the rowing clubs using the Thames, for example. I live 20-minute motorcycle ride from Henley, and then I'm on the River Thames, and of course we've got the Henley Regatta, and you've got the rowing clubs from Marlow, Henley, and Wargrave that do row against each other. So rowing for me is more visibly seen than sailing. I will admit that. There are on inland waterways. There are limited facilities. There are facilities. It's more done at coastal level, but then it's more dangerous at coastal level when you go down to the coast. It's not as big a sport as it used to be. I think if you go back earlier into the last century, it was a bigger sport, and we're talking way back in like the 1920s and 30s. More people took part in sailing activities than they do now. And it's obviously a culture shift, and it's a culture change within the society that we live in. Obviously, with a massive growth in professionalism, and obviously football reaching the greedy levels it has now. Rugby union going professional, rugby league having the Super League here in Europe, ice hockey growing in popularity and being the second most popular sport across the whole of Europe. So we're including the UK in that. There is social changes in Europe that have led to this. Sailing, you've got to be a competent, you've got to be competent on the water anyway. It takes years and years and years to get to a competent level where it's safe for you to compete. It's very technical. Obviously, sailing boats cost money. It's not a cheap sport to get involved in, and you've got to to be a competent sailor, you've got to go through many years of experience to do it. It's a difficult one. I think there has been a cultural shift towards more team sports, especially over the last 20, 30 years. And with those particular sports evolving themselves, especially rugby union, that's a big one. Because rugby union was mostly seen as an upper class sport, sailing is seen as an upper class sport. Now rugby union's got more professional and has got more access to the working and middle classes and greater funding. Although we can debate the RFU's massive losses financially. It's professional now, sponsorship, academies, massive growth in the game over the last 20 odd years. Sailing, it is a social thing. You don't see working class kids do sailing as an activity, really. It's seen as a very niche sport. It's either done in coastal communities or by the very, very wealthy. It is interesting that you follow it. It's good that you obviously are a fan of the sport, but obviously there is clearly issues that are holding it back, and funding is a massive, massive issue, and it's how the funding formulas worked out. The British Olympic Committee and the British Olympic funding has come under a lot of criticism since 2012. That is something that we can all agree on. With the cutting for funding for women's sport in, let's say, the skeleton bob and the bobsleigh, but the men's keeping their funding. That was a bit bizarre, considering that the women's skeleton team actually won more medals over the last couple of Olympics than the men's. So that made no sense. A lot of Olympic sports are having their funding cut, and obviously in this modern day and age, everyone's so easily offended about that. But some of these sports we're not very good at. Plain and simple. Why fund a sport that not enough people are doing, or why fund a sport that we're shit at? Really, basketball is a funny one. Oh, that's a bit of a cheeky joke there. Get the asylum seekers for the sailing. The thing is, I have done a video on the other channel to do with the current political state of Europe. I try and avoid politics on this channel. I leave that to the other one where I have less subscribers and less people care. The issue is we have seen some people from immigrant and refugee backgrounds actually do really really, really good at sport, and so we shouldn't, knock those who have had to make a perilous journey. A lot of them actually do love sport, and it's a way to make them integrate. So integration into society is a very important thing, but the most of them have been smuggled across in dinghies. Um, Oh yeah, kayaking. I used to love a bit of kayaking as well. I did a little bit of that on school trips. I've done a bit of rowing. I've done a bit of sailing on school trips, but it was seen as a very elitist thing because we weren't. I didn't go to States, but I went to boarding school, so I can see the sailing, rowing, kayaking being a bit more of elitist in perception. I know people from working class and middle class backgrounds do get involved, but it's seen as a barrier to some. Oh yes, Parisians. Yeah, again, there's riots in Paris and across France. They're very good at that. Again, I mentioned that on the other channel. I think what's happening in Europe is going to have an effect, and this is what I call the Brexit effect again, and how no one has done a study into the impacts of what politically and economically is going to happen over the next couple of years is really, really surprising to me. The amount of money that's in professional sport at the highest level, the amount of profits they make, the size of the economies that professional sports are. It really does surprise me that no one has done an impact study, especially when the Premier League's selling these TV rights in the last within since the Brexit decision, and you've got TV rights being put up for tender for a variety of sports at professional level. It's really surprising that not a single impact study has been publicly released, and if they have been done, we don't know about. We think with all our history that England will be all up in sailing. Yeah, I mean, at the Olympics, Great Britain does very, very well and gets a lot of medals at sailing. It's just Sir Ben Ainsley's really, obviously, you know, one of the best of all time. We've had some great sailors, but if you notice, look at the backgrounds they come from. They're not from working class backgrounds. They are from the very, very top of society, and that's very niche. Um, and it is seen as an elitist sport. Now, I don't know at grassroots level how elite it really is. Unfortunately, there's not many. It doesn't seem to be a very how do I put it, well advertised sport that you can get involved in, like a sailing club. Now, I live near a couple of areas where, yeah, there are sailing clubs. They're not well advertised with the local schools, the local scout groups. I don't know if the local scout groups go sailing, the local schools, colleges. I don't know if they have links to the local. Because I live near the River Thames, and the River Thames has a lot of like Caversham Lock, and there's lots of reservoirs around here. We've got Bray Lake, we've got the reservoirs near West London and Heathrow. I am surprised that more people aren't sailing in this area. Is it a funding thing where how much you have to pay? There's a variety of things you have to question, like boat rental, or do you own your own boat? And I am surprised, but I think it's more of a social thing within not just the UK but across the Western world. I think it's more of a social thing with the fact that the professional team sports are becoming more and more popular, and we've seen massive growth in some professional sports, be it on the financial side. So football's got exceptionally wealthy. Rugby union obviously went professional. So I don't know. Tennis is a very interesting one because we do have um, events on the world tour in both men and women's at Nottingham, Queens, Eastbourne, and obviously Wimbledon. I do have a tennis club up the road from me. Literally about, I would say, 5 minute, 10 minute walk. I barely see anyone using its facilities. Like that's what I find really interesting. There is a tennis club there. Barely see anyone using the facilities, so it's an interesting one. Now, where I live is, well, I call it a mini London. I'm 30 miles west of London, in a fast growing urban area as well. So Reading, Wokingham, and Bracknell, based that bit of the M4 corridor as an area. We are rapidly expanding population wise. There's a lot of people moving from London and Birmingham, all these big cities, to get work down here. We do have a lot of sports teams and sports facilities in the local area. I'm very surprised though, especially with the tennis one, which I go past regularly, that not many people ever use it. Now, it's the wrong time of year for tennis, really. It's pissing out with rain outside. It's pissing down. It's windy. You don't want to play tennis on grass in that. It's because it's grass court. Um, Even with hard court in the wet, it's not nice. Tennis is more of a summer sport, or if you have an indoor facility, indoor sport, you can play it indoors. Um, the Lawn Tennis Association is very much like the RFU and the FA as a governing body. Mud brick. I think the local tennis courts are grass. They could be the not the AstroTurf, the hard court variety that you get at the, let's say, the Australian Open. But I barely see anyone uh, using the facilities. Okay. But again, you learn for a life skill, and then you enjoy the sport because of the sporting side of that life skill you learn, which is very very interesting. I should give it to Murray's mum and let her loose on the nation. I do hope not. She does most of her coaching in the US now. This is the problem. A lot of the American, if you go to the US, there's a lot of these tennis academies in Miami and Orlando and LA. And the issue is Jamie and Andy. They're a very interesting pair of brothers. I mean, Jamie Murray's very successful at doubles. He's won several Grand Slams, and everyone forgets that Jamie Murray actually won a Grand Slam in 2007 before Andy won at Wimbledon. And Andy's obviously won a handful of Grand Slams as well. As a pairing, they are very successful players in their own right. Andy Murray, their mum Judy, obviously coached them in their early days, and if it wasn't for her coaching them in the early days, I don't think they would have reached the level they've reached now. And now you've got Carl Edmund coming through, which is good. Now it's interesting to see that the Murray brothers are Scottish, and they're from Dunblane, not famed for their tennis facilities in that part of Scotland. You've got obviously Carl Edmund. Don't know where he's from, but he seems to be from that kind of upper middle class kind of strata. And then we're getting a bit thin on the ground when it comes to male tennis players who are decent. Women's tennis players, Joanna Konta, she's actually Australian, and they rejected her, and she's a moody cow. I can't stand her. Heather Watson. We have got tennis players there. It's, are they using the facilities? Because yes, I do have a tennis club that is actually sanctioned by the Lawn Tennis Association down the road. So it is interesting. It seems to be quite an elitist tennis club, though. So I don't know how how accessible it is for the average Joe to be a member. Really, it seems from what I've seen, very white middle class people in the local area go there. I also don't think there's that interest. Yes, yes, the Murray brothers were actually at that massacre that day, and I remember it as a young kid because I'm a few years younger than the Murray brothers, not by much. I'm only 2 years younger than Andy, and I think I'm 4 years younger than Jamie Murray, if I'm about right. I was still at primary school at the time, and when that was, I mean, that was the last major mass shooting of a sense that the Americans have on a daily basis. We decided to change the gun laws; the Americans didn't, kind of thing, and they wondered why. But I do remember that that happened at a time of on a sporting sense. We had Euro '96, rugby had just turned professional, so we just had the World Cup in South Africa that had gone down so well. So in a sporting sense, things were on the up for a lot of people, and then that happened. And a lot of people don't realise that the Murray brothers were at school that day, and again, very, 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 very close to not being here. Stroke of fortune, possibly. But yes, Dunblane is more remembered for a negative than a positive, and that is something that should not be underestimated. And why they got into tennis, I have no idea. I don't know why the Murray brothers got into tennis, considering the community they're from and the part of Scotland they're from. But tennis does seem to be a very elitist sport because I look at my friends who went to the local state schools, and none of them play tennis now. None of them go down the local tennis club to play. They're all interested in the football side of things or rugby side of things. Again, or ice hockey, because again, they are more accessible sports. There's none of that. how do I put it, social barrier. I don't think it's a financial barrier. I think it's more of a social barrier. I think it's seen as one of those upper class sports. And I think the Lawn Tennis Association could do more to get involved with schools and colleges and have that involvement with youth. I know that obviously it costs a lot. A lot of these kids, when they're good young, they go to these academies abroad, mostly to America to play when they're 15, 16. But when you look at accessibility in schools and colleges and after school clubs, most kids, they don't want to play tennis. They want to play the team sports, and I think that's a social thing. Golf here in Australia is so expensive that people are giving up playing at course fees off the planet. Well, the golf course I worked at is now a housing estate. I worked at a golf course here in where I live in Bracknell, and it's gone now. It's a housing estate. They're actually building it as a housing estate. It was sold off a couple of years ago, to a great shame, because it was also the head office of the golf company that operated it as well. I also live very close to Wentworth, so one of the top courses in the world, Wentworth Links. I live 15 minutes ride on my motorbike from Wentworth, so I can get on the bike, park up at Virginia Water Lakes, and if when the PGA Tour, European PGA Tour is in town, I can watch Wentworth. But yeah, golf fees again, accessibility. That is something that is a big concern. My golfing talent is the driving range. I like cathartically going on a driving range and drilling a ball 200 yards if I'm stressed. But if you are an amateur player or wanting to practice, if course fees are seen as a barrier, it will put people off. Why that is happening in Australia, I don't know. Obviously, the weather has an impact on golf courses, because if it's dry and drought ridden, which a lot of Australia's had the last couple of years, is really drought kind of conditions. Upkeep as well. Is it? I don't know why. That's something that the authorities in sport in Australia need to look at, accessibility, because there have been some great Australian players over the years who, well, being some like Greg Norman, for example, one of the best players of all time in my eyes, growing up. Great Australian players in the sport. So if you're putting off that accessibility, it's not a good look. St Andrews, yeah, that's a world class facility as well. I live near Wentworth. St Andrews, yeah, that is a world class facility. I'm lucky that I live near a lot of golf courses where I live. There's about 5 or 6 within a 5-10 mile radius. Some are 9 holes, some are 18, and of course Wentworth is links. There's more than one course at Wentworth. But it's the accessibility. Some courses are cheaper than others. Others are really expensive. Some are member only. Some are actually just member only. And there is a member only course not too far from me, and that is really inaccessible for your average. I just want to have a little bit of fun on the old links. So yeah, golf does have that unfortunate. Accessibility barrier as well. Do I not like horse racing? I used to work at Ascot Racecourse. I have been onto the old ponies more than once. I prefer jumps over flat, and of course Ascot's famous for more of its flat racing than its jump racing. But I have worked Ascot Racecourse over the years, more than once. I've been to the races at Ascot more than once. I've done Royal Ascot and won a lot of money at Royal Ascot. It's one of those courses that I preferred as the old setup rather than the new one. I was lucky enough to go to the course before they rebuilt it, and I was also lucky enough to work there the first year it was reopened in 2008. So I've seen the old Ascot course and the new Ascot course with the grandstands, and I've worked at the new one, and I the issue is, and I will say this: I don't go every race event. I go every other year. I try and be sparing because it can be an expensive day out. The most I've got in one year was 4 times, because I had the financial means to do so at the time, and I had a lot of friends who were into horse racing as well. And unfortunately, one of them passed away. But we were a close knit racing group, and as time has gone on, we've had other things to focus on. But what I will say about the new Ascot racecourse is if you're not going to the races that particular day, let's say it's Royal Ascot week, you want to avoid that part of the road network and train network. You want to make a massive diversion. Uh, the traffic backs up. Now, I live in Bracknell, which is 2-3 miles west of Ascot. When Ascot races is on, you don't want to go towards London that way. It does affect, the transport a lot. And a lot of people, a lot of my friends live and work in Ascot, and they are not always positive about the experience year on year at Ascot Racecourse. And as someone who's actually worked there as well, it's a nightmare when you're doing the night shift to clear up after all the day stuff, and you get the train and you get off the train and all these rather drunk upper class people trying to pour into a train and you're trying to get out of the station. It's a pain. Um, so it's a hit and miss. This is where you've got the positive and the negative of a massive sporting event. I do like the horse racing. I don't watch it as much as I used to. I'm more of a jumps, like Grand National type of fan rather than the flat. But at the same time, when it's on, it can be a nightmare for residents around the Ascot, Bracknell, Sunningdale areas because of the massive amounts of traffic and the delays on the train network and the buses. It is hit and miss. It's positive and a negative. It brings a lot of money in, but at the same time, not all the residents in the local area, me included, actually necessarily enjoy having the Ascot races on, because if we live and work nearby, it does affect us as well. The local transport infrastructure isn't great, and that's why we're seeing Kempton Park being put up for sale, and sadly, Kempton Park, another one of my local racecourses that I used to live by when I was in West London, is going soon. It's going to be demolished and turned to houses, and it's a shame, but it is what it is, and it is what it is. Yeah, you are lucky in Scotland. You've got St Andrews, Knockhill, and Five Flyers. You've also don't forget you've got the Dundee Stars and Glasgow Clan, and you've got the Murrayfield Rink as well. Uh, but yeah, you are lucky in the facilities that you have nearby. I would say I'm lucky that I've got the Medeski down the road. I've got Ascot Racecourse. I've got Wentworth Golf Course. I've got Castle Combe not that far away from me, motor racing, down the M4. So I go to Castle Combe and I can go to Thruxton as well, not that far away. So we've got Thruxton and Castle Combe within about an hour's drive. So we're kind of lucky in that sense. Brands Act is only in Kent, so I've only got to go down the M25 for a little bit. We've got, what else have we got around? We've got the local ice rink with the Bracknell Bees. We've got Bracknell Town Football Club, literally on my doorstep. All I've got to do is walk out of my house and go 5 minutes down the road, and I'm at a football club. Twickenham and the Stoop. We've got the Stoop as well. They're not too far away. What else is Brentford is not that far away to get to. I want to watch the football on a bit cheaper. Go to Brentford. I've done that a few times. I think I'm reasonably lucky in where I am on the M4, M3 corridors. That it doesn't take that long to get to Southampton or Portsmouth. So if you want to watch Pompey play in the lower leagues, you can. If you want to watch Reading play in the Championship, you can. Although it's not really a good watch right now if you're a Reading fan. Got Swindon down the road if you want to go see a bit of lower league football and ice hockey. So we are lucky, I suppose, in the population area that I'm in. It's not as spread out as other parts of the world. I've been to Twickenham. It's an interesting stadium, Twickenham, because when I first went, the South Stand was a separate stand, and the last time I went, they were preparing the East Stand to link up and everything, and that's part of the reason why Twickenham and the RFU are losing so much money. I've seen the Stoop grow as a stadium as well. From when I first went to Twickenham in 1999 to now, the Stoop looks nice as a stadium. It's not a bad little stadium next to the main Twickenham, where Harlequins play. I think I am very fortunate in where I live in the world that on the edge of London and outside, there's a lot of sporting facilities that are easily accessible. And some people forget where Castle Combe and Thruxton are, but they're not actually that far away from where I live. And it's a good opportunity to have a little nose and see what's going on. And Knockhill, I'm not a big fan of Knockhill as a racetrack. This summer in the British touring cars, the weather was horrendous, and it was just rivers of water. Yes, they managed to complete the race day, but on that same day at Silverstone, it was a washout, and there was some really bad weather that day. I'm not a fan of Knockhill. I think it's a little bit on the short side. It's not a very wide circuit as well. So overtaking is, you've only got one or two corners where you can overtake and overtake safely. Um, it is a circuit that is limited by the geography it's in as well. Obviously, in the central belt, where it is, there's some high ground. It's very limited in the area that they're able to build the racetrack. Not a terrible racetrack. It's not my favourite on the British touring car calendar. I I think it's a bit on the narrow side and it's a bit on the short side. It does, but it's whether the land around Knockhill can be used for that track extension. It does come down to how much space and real estate is available. That's one of the issues there. Also, how much money is available and how much it will cost. We've seen what happened with Donington and then run out of money. So that is a concern when it comes to, can they afford to expand the circuit. Also, it's very limited as it's one of the main. I think it's one of the few racetracks in Scotland. To take it out of commission and do that much work to it would be a massive blow to Scottish motorsport. So you would have to do it and keep it open, which is very, very difficult. To extend it whilst keeping it open is difficult. I do think it does need definitely a refurb. It may need a layout change, but it's a very short circuit as well. It's not a very, very long lap, so there's only so much you can do. I think there's a limit of space on the Knockhill site, so that'll be interesting. I think I just enjoy it. One of the least circuit. I think Oulton Park is another one that needs looking at for widening the track, because that's a very narrow circuit, and they don't use the full Oulton Park loop. They use the short version in the touring cars, which frustrates me because the long Oulton Park loop is brilliant. But again, it's not on the wide side. But as we've seen with Donington, you get it wrong when you're doing a track extension or a massive refurb, and you're in trouble. And I would say they've mucked up Silverstone with the changes they made at Silverstone that are unsustainably. They put that new pointless grandstand in. They changed the layout, and I don't like the current Silverstone setup. I think they made a big foul up there. But it's a debating point because motorsport is in the talking the talking points at this with Sophia Flörsch and her accident, and Nico Hulkenberg's accident as well, with single seat race cars getting flipped and ending up in really nasty situations. That's why motorsport's really in the talking point is Sophia Flörsch's massive shunt at Macau and Nico Hulkenberg's car getting flipped and rolled over and caught on the catch fence at Abu Dhabi. That is a concern as well. I paid to take a Mercedes Evolution around a few laps and never had enough track to properly boot it. I think that's the issue with Knockhill is the length of the circuit. It's a very short lap. Track days are fun. I've had a lot of mates do them. I've got mates who are involved in motorsport as mechanics, and I've got mates who do motocross as riders. It is a good laugh. It is a good, kind of team spirit you have there, and that kind of camaraderie. Again, I'm very lucky in that I'm close to a lot of sporting facilities. Others aren't so fortunate, and the fact you actually have the opportunity to do that is great. Unfortunately, Knockhill is a very limited circuit in length and width, so you're limited with the track that you've got. Would I say Knockhill is a terrible circuit? No, I do think it's outdated in obviously when it was designed and tarmacked. The cars were less powerful back in the day. The old 50s and 60s touring cars were not what they are now. The old little saloon cars are much more powerful. They're wider, they're bigger. The British touring car package is bigger now than what it was before, with the amount of entrants as well. A circuit like Knockhill isn't a great circuit for a pack of 30 plus race cars. It really isn't. Especially when they can average 130 mile an hour on a lap. Average. That's not their top speed. That's their average speed. Knockhill is just not the right circuit for it. It's too short. But we can debate the pros and cons of Nothill. It's still on the calendar, whereas Mondello Park in Ireland's been taken off. So it you know it is where it is. It's an area in not far from Edinburgh and Glasgow, but it's far enough to be in the sticks. So yeah, it is in a very rural area. When the weather comes in at Knockhill, it's very exposed to the wind and the rain. When it does want to weather, I mean, the weather right now is atrocious. Up at Knockhill, that will probably be regionally a variable. Um, Much like riding in the Thames Valley, even though I'm on a hill, the Thames Valley itself is a weird shape. So when it's drizzling up in, I don't know, Hertfordshire, it could be a thunderstorm here. When it snows and it's light dusting on the Chilterns here in the Thames Valley, it draws it up the valley and we have snowdrifts. So it has a regional variation when the weather conditions come in. So if there's a weather front coming in, Glasgow will have a bit of drizzle. Knockhill will have possible snow because it's high. It's on that little bit of high ground. It's very exposed. It is where it is. It is the centre of Scottish motorsport, and that is the problem. Is there isn't another circuit in Scotland. So if Knockhill did have to be refurbed and readjusted, there isn't another circuit in the north of England, in let's say Cumbria or Northumberland or in Scotland, to take up the slack for motorsport events. If Knockhill was out of commission to have a refurb or a track relay, so that I think is the issue with Scottish motorsport. They don't have that secondary motor circuit. Cattle farms and wind farms. You could say that about the southwest and Wales as well. Um, Obviously, the economy is exceptionally rural, and so this also makes Knockhill less desirable for international motorsport events, is because it's in the middle of nowhere. The nearest hotels for the teams and the fans, where you're gonna, where all these fans are going to stay? Are they going to camp at the circuit, or are they going to stay in hotels and B&Bs and campsites nearby? That's another reason I think why Knockhill does need a refurb, and they do need a second racetrack in Scotland of a decent standard to take up some of the slack, because when it does rain or the weather gets bad at Knockhill, it does close in, visibility drops, the conditions get really nasty that you wouldn't want to drive on the motorway. So Knockhill is an interesting one. I've seen some great races at Knockhill, don't get me wrong, on the TV. I've seen some great action at Knockhill, but I enjoy it less than, let's say, Thruxton. I enjoy Thruxton more. I enjoy the Brands Hatch GP circuit, not the Indy, the GP. The Indy circuit's too short. The GP circuit, I enjoy that well. I enjoy that. So I think when you look at the other circuits on the British Touring Car calendar and the British Superbike calendar, and that are used by British Motorsport, Knockhill, sort of nearer the bottom of my enjoy list. But that's not to say it's a bad circuit or a bad facility. It's just it's limited in what it can give you, and its location harms it. Much like Silverstone being in the middle of pissing nowhere as well, it doesn't help. Um, but it is what it is. But it's interesting. It's just surrounded by farmland. It's just surrounded by farmland and rural area, and that when it comes to motor racing circuit, you want to have it near a centre of civilization. It attracts more investment that way. But it is what it is. There's a reason why Knockhill is still open. It's obviously making a profit. It's obviously, you know, yeah, it's obviously making a profit. It's obviously making enough money to stay open and be profitable. It's just it possibly could be more profitable had it been closer to Edinburgh or Glasgow. But it is what it is. It's not the end of the world. It does need some improvement. I think everyone would admit that. Whether they decide to extend it or not, I don't know. It's to do with the cost of the land, and is it feasible to do that and make money? We've seen what's happened with Donington and the mess they've made there. So open to debate. But it's not often that we talk about horse racing and motorsport on the live stream, so it's nice to have that conversation about something different. And motorsport in the last couple of weeks has been in the headlines for some scary incidents in single seaters, F1 and F3, two massive accidents that could have been much more serious than they were. And the fact that Sophia Flörsch walked into that press conference and walked out doing that she had just shattered her spine is something that's quite nice to see. And Nico Hulkenberg, again, his accident could have been a bit more serious than it was. It wasn't the most high speed accident. It's the aftermath where he's caught hanging and the car catches fire. That's not good. They've got to look at the F1 aerodynamics. They've got to look at why the car caught fire. Yeah, but that's the issue. Superbikes and touring cars. You can't have MotoGP there because the circuit's too short and not wide enough. Superbikes can just about do not kill. The touring car program, obviously the support packages as well. You would argue that the GT and the Porsche Carrera Cup kind of races don't work at not kill. They really don't. The cars are obviously really powerful. Grand Tourers and things like that. Oh, how do you end up going backwards? What is funny is no one's showing the footage of the lap coming into that section. They don't show the section before. There were some incorrectly waved yellow flags, so the car that she hit was slowing. Obviously, she's either had a failure of the brakes or the throttle further back, clips him, flies through the air. She was already losing control the corner section before, coming into that section of straight. Something's happened off camera because everyone who's filming it is filming the corner going through. They're seeing all the expensive cars go through. They're not paying attention to them coming into the tight hairpin. They're just paying attention to go around it. What I can gather is it's probably a stuck throttle or a brake failure or both, which on a single seat car is basically tantamount to you're going to die. End of. To have a sticking throttle, a throttle stuck wide open, and a brake failure on a single seat race car open wheel is it's far more serious than on a touring car where you can just downshift through the gears to deliberately stall the engine. When that happens on a single seater, they don't have a reverse gear. So that accident could have a mechanical failure to it. She does clip him, but when she, instead of just going off, because of the front and rear wings, it treated it like an aircraft and then a frisbee when it spun round. I'm surprised with that Macau. It just highlights the issues with Macau as a street circuit. It's a very tight, narrow circuit. We saw last year with the GT supercars, they all piled up. We saw it last year with the World Touring cars, they all piled up. And we've seen another serious accident in the F3. We see it regularly at Macau. Macau is a lethal circuit. I think she might have been knocked out slightly or concussed because she doesn't fully remember all the accidents. She's just very, very lucky to be alive. I wouldn't say, and there's a lot of people saying, "Oh, she's a woman, she shouldn't be doing motor racing. Oh, she's young, she shouldn't be doing it." She's been racing since she was 5 years old in karts, up to Ginetta Juniors, up to single seaters. I've seen her race in the British touring car package. She's a fair racer. She's had a few prangs. That is the most serious she's had. Every race driver has an accident. I remember Hamilton having a few when he was in his early days of F1. I've seen Vettel plough it into the wall. Michael Schumacher I've seen go off. So even great drivers have had prangs. That accident reminds me scarily, actually, of Barrichello at Imola in '94, where the car took off and came through a section and got airborne and landed on top of the barrier rather than backwards. I'm old enough just to remember '94 at Imola, the fatal weekend that killed 2 and nearly killed 3 drivers. It reminds me of Barrichello's accident at Imola in '94 in free practice. If it was in the '90s, she would have had a far more serious injury, maybe death. Yes. The fact that also on that corner, which is a very high speed, you come from high speed to very low speed, but you go through a hairpin still at a reasonable in third gear. They put a media block is insanity. The fact that but this is Macau, and Macau is a dangerous circuit that has killed people in the last year. It killed a couple of bike riders. Macau is a dangerous circuit, and as street circuits go, it's horrible. Jules Bianchi won. He died a year later of the injuries sustained, but you could class that as a fatal. If that's an F1 car, she's going even faster. It's a testament to the crash structure they put in place around these single seat race cars now. Obviously, was it last year or the year before? Billy Munger lost both his legs. They still have flaws in them, these single seaters. It doesn't matter if you're going F4, Formula Ford kind of low level, 150 mile an hour top speeds to F1. and IndyCar and Formula E. I remember Nick Heidfeld in Formula E's first race had a similar accident where he got airborne and landed backwards on a barrier. Admittedly, it was a softer landing and he was going at a slower speed because Formula E only go to 150. But Nico Hulkenberg had a similar accident a couple of years ago in the Formula E on a street circuit where he was again pitched and rotated in the air at high speed. Single seaters are prone to do this because of the way the aero package works. It's basically like an upside down plane. But when you get that front wing off the ground, it will do crazy stuff. We've seen it with Mark Webber at Valencia in 2011 or 2010, where he got airborne after hitting Kovalainen's Lotus or Caterham. When you get the front end of an F1 car up, it's very hard to control it. Her accident, though, reminds me of Hulkenberg in the Formula E and Barrichello in 94 at Imola. When you get a single seat race car up with the way the wings work, front and rear, it becomes like a kite, maybe like a paper aeroplane. It's very hard to control, and you're in the hands of the gods then. The fact that she came in at such speed says to me that she had a stuck throttle or a brake failure and couldn't slow the vehicle down. But again, there was also questions of incorrectly weighed yellow flags, which is why she hit the vehicle she hit. If she hadn't hit that car, I think she would have gone straight into the barrier, nose first, and then we're talking about something completely different. And her not being here, I think Macau as a circuit, how long can it continue as a race circuit into the future? I don't know. It's a notorious circuit. Just go on YouTube and type crashes at Macau, and you'll see how narrow the circuit is, and when a crash happens, how many cars will pile up at high speed. Her one is on a highlight reel now. Hers is one of the highlight reel accidents at Macau, but there was a big one last year with about 20 to 30 GT cars went into the corner afterwards. So the next corner down, they all piled up. Yeah, he died. I've seen that footage. He comes over the bridge, gets it wrong, goes head first. He's done. The pub doesn't even have a scratch. That's the terrifying thing, how solidly that pub is built. But yeah, the Isle of Man kills people. The Ulster 250, the Ulster 400. I don't like TT racing. I really don't. Precisely because of that reason. The road furniture is lethal. And I've seen enough bike crashes and I've had friends die in bike crashes for me to go, I don't like TT racing. Road racing is horrible. Oh yeah, you do. I find it interesting. These animal rights loonies. Jump horses, horses that do national hunt racing are better looked after than humans. Flat racing, I'm not a fan of because the way they look after horses isn't the same standard. The flat race horses are not treated the same, but jump horses they are treated exceptionally well. And the animal rights nutcases who really need to actually get a grip, because a lot of the medications they take have to be tested on animals, because human test subjects, it's almost illegal now to, unless under severe restrictions, to have human test subject. Don't get me started on that. I will admit I do watch horse racing a lot less than I used to, for a variety of reasons. It's not that I find it less interesting. I just watch it a lot less than I used to. I have also seen some pretty nasty motorsport accidents. There are some where obviously the rider or the driver is dead, and I've seen a few of them. I've seen that in the MotoGP with Simoncelli, and I'll forget the Japanese rider on the Moto 2 who had a massive shunt that involved Scott Redding a few years ago. So I've seen that. I've seen a few of them, which make you feel slightly unwell. There's been some Le Mans accidents where I am cringing. There's been some IndyCar accidents like Justin Wilson. I felt sick. I think there's some accidents where they're not getting out of that, and there are some that you don't know. But there are some massive. Motorsport is lethal. There was. Was it the British touring cars with the guy who went backwards into the barrier at Rockingham, and you knew it was serious because he was hurt, and you just felt that moment. I've seen a few of them. There was a couple at Alton Park. I remember James Thompson and the British touring cars at Alton Park in the wet. He rear-ended a barrier. He literally lost. I don't know if he was tagged or he spun out, but he went rear end first in the, I think it was the Vauxhall Vectra at the time, the Vauxhall Cavalier he was driving in the Super Touring era, and he went backwards at the barrier. Bad. That was a bad one. Massive shunt. There was a couple. Where was it? Was it Thruxton or Alton Park? On the start line where there was a pile up. There was one of the Ginetta GT races when the guy literally stalled on the line. The car behind him went through about full acceleration. And that was horrible. The Simoncelli one was bad. Yes. I think the funny thing is, shit, my motorcycle helmet. Simoncelli. I've got a Simoncelli helmet. So that's the irony of that. Talking about Simoncelli. I've also got a Rossi helmet as well. I will admit, motorcycle racing is far more terrifying than car racing. But we've seen a couple of incidents in the last couple of years with single seaters, especially, that are concerning me about the safety of single seat race cars. And is there a limit with these aero packages where they have to go, hang on a second, this is getting a bit out of hand now? I think the Billy Munger one is the worrying one, with the fact that the crash structure failed and he lost both his legs. When I've seen accidents like that where all the drivers get out fine in similar seasons. The scary thing is, you're on board with Billy Munger as the accident happens. He had the onboard camera for that race, and you actually see him go the arse end up the car in front, because the car in front was stationary. Had the car in front been moving at some speed, I don't think he would have broken both his legs. But it does suggest to me that there is a design flaw in these single seat race cars in the nose cone. Sophia Flörsch, we wouldn't know. Well, if we do a crash test simulation on a car and put a crash test dummy and fire that car at 176 mile an hour into a wall head first at Macau, we could find out if she would have lived. But that's something I don't think we want to think about. The fact she's walked out of hospital with a neck brace on says how lucky she is. I think she broke the upper part of her spine, which is exceptionally dangerous. So, she's exceptionally lucky. And there are those morons who say women shouldn't be involved in motorsport, young people shouldn't be involved in motorsport. That's how you learn. She will continue racing. She is a lunatic. All motor racing drivers are a few screws loose. She will continue racing. She will be back in the car next year at some point. But Mika Hakkinen had a similar accident in, I think, 94 or 95. Barrichello had a pretty nasty one. There have been some big shunts, and yes, the safety of these vehicles has improved markedly. That doesn't mean it's safe. So when things like this happen, fans have got so used to drivers having these big shunts, getting out and walking away like, oh yeah, it's fine. That when they don't, they're like, oh, the sport's dangerous. The sport was always dangerous. Last year in the NASCAR, there was Amarola went into the back of someone else and hit them so hard he broke his own spine. And he's in a fully enclosed stock car with a very strong chassis, and he went into the back of another car, and yeah, his spine broke in 3 places. So he's had a similar injury to Sophia Flörsch, and he was in a fair bit of discomfort. He came back and raced later on that season, which is insane. There have been some big accidents in NASCAR, massive ones. Bubba Wallace, had a big one at Pocono where he just went straight across the corner at 190 mile an hour and went straight into the barrier, and the car just shattered. He was racing the next day. That's how insane it is, really. So motor racing drivers have to have the odd. No, it was Earnhardt Senior. He died. Jeff Earnhardt. There's been a few NASCAR fatalities. The last one was Earnhardt Senior, I think, in 2000, where they decided to change. Well, there might have been a few since then, but they decided to change the safety barriers and the structures of the cars. They made rule changes to make it a safer sport. Then you've had in IndyCar, you've had quite a few. The latest been Justin Wilson. There's been some big ones in IndyCar. Rallying, there's been a couple. Motorcycle, any form of motorcycle sport, there's been loads. Been a host of fatalities in on the motorbikes. Thankfully, F1, apart from Jules Bianchi, which I think was a bit more of a freak one because he died obviously of his injuries and didn't die on the day. F1 single seat racing has been very, very lucky, especially in the F1 and the feeder series for F1. However, we've had some really serious accidents that should have killed the drivers. But it's an inherently dangerous motorsport in all forms is inherently dangerous, and a lot of fans don't realise how dangerous it actually is. They see the riders or the drivers get up after an accident, walk away, and they don't realise how lucky they are. And when a near fatality or a fatality occurs, they're up in arms about it. It's like there's only so safe you can make a sport. So and there are some circuits that are inherently lethal. The Nürburgring kills 3 to 12 people a year on average. So on a given year, anywhere between the number of 3 to 12 is your average. Sometimes you get more, sometimes you get less. And a lot of people see certain circuits as a challenge, and they go for it, and they end up, not making it as a result. Motorsport is just inherently insane. The you got to have a screw loose to do motorsport. I would admit. We've seen some big shunts at Le Mans. We've seen in the V8 supercars, we've seen some massive accidents. Oh yeah, Indianapolis, the Indy 500, or the Indianapolis Oval. It's long, but it's known as a restrictor plate, so all cars are pretty balanced. When you've got a field of up to 40 cars that are all pretty much even going for it, you're going to see pileups. Last year in the NASCAR, there was very few cars finished. Some big accidents in that one. But because the cars are so much safer now than what they were 20 years ago, no one died. Doesn't mean that drivers weren't hurt, but fans see the drivers just go, wave, get out the car, walk away. They don't realise how close that person was to severe injury. I would say to a point, yes, motor racing is for the adrenaline junkies. It's a matter of time before there's another fatality. I'm going to go for a street circuit claiming that fatality. I'm going to say a street circuit is going to claim the next fatality in motorsport, whether it's in Formula E or Formula 3 or Formula 1 or GP2 or whatever it is. It's probably going to be in a single seater. It's probably going to be on a street circuit, and I wouldn't be surprised if it's Macau or Singapore or somewhere like that. A street circuit is going to kill someone. Macau is probably going to be the next person who dies is probably going to be at Macau, I think, but I could be wrong. It could happen anywhere. I think we're overdue of a big prime, a big one that is a fatality. In motorsport, I think it's got to wake the fans up. A lot of the fans don't realise how dangerous the sport actually is. I wouldn't say Monaco isn't as bad as some circuits. It has killed people in the past. There have been nasty accidents at Monaco in the past. But at the moment, the way the aero package on the F1 cars, it doesn't really allow you to have that kind of accident. They've made some changes to some sections. It's not as dangerous as it was. However, the tunnel section, I'm still waiting for someone to die down that tunnel section again. I'm waiting for someone to come out the tunnel, hit the bump in the road, completely lose control, have a brake failure. We saw it this year in the F1. I'm waiting for another serious accident. Jenson Button had a serious accident down there and was hurt. Perez has had a serious accident down there and couldn't race. He was deemed unfit to race. He was hurt. I'm waiting for that serious accident, but Monaco, the speed isn't as bad. They're not as fast. The cars are too safe for it. They're not as fast, but Monaco is a dull Grand Prix in the European part of the season. Really dull. Nothing happens anymore. That's not to say someone won't have a big shunt, but it rarely happens at Monaco. There's too many slow corners where you're in first or second gear and you're barely moving to have that big shunt. There's only a couple of sections where you're actually fast enough to have that accident, which could be serious. But I wouldn't be surprised. I think Macau is more likely. Um, the speeds at Macau are higher, much higher. Um, I think that's more likely to have the serious accident. Nürburgring, they do competitive motorsport events at the Nürburgring, so we could see on the Nordschleife a big accident. Absolutely. There's nothing to suggest there isn't going to be a big accident at the Nordschleife. We've seen some big ones there in both cup competition and open track day. And that, as I said, kills people regularly, but people know that the Nordschleife and the Nürburgring full circuit, GP and Nordschleife, is the most dangerous motor racing circuit in the world. And people see that as a challenge. But when it comes to mainstream motorsport, I'm waiting for that big one. Sophia Flörsch is a wake-up call, but I think there are definitely issues within, especially single-seat race cars, and some racetracks not being, they're too dangerous. I'm always up for the risk factor. That makes it kind of fun. But you know that some circuits are far more dangerous than they need to be. Macau is one of them. I would say any street circuit is flawed. Surface Paradise, that's a concerning one. They got rid of Long Beach, California. That was too dangerous. But there are still IndyCar street circuits that they still race on, and I'm cringing every time they race because I know that's pure concrete barrier. That isn't safer barrier. That's pure solid 4 foot thick concrete they're going to hit. I feel a bit queasy when they go around in the Indy cars because the fuel they run on is racing ethanol, which is exceptionally explosive. And we've seen cars burst with a ball of flame, and we have seen drivers killed in IndyCar in the last decade. There's a lot being killed in IndyCar. So I'm really concerned when they go racing that the car's just going to explode. But yeah, interesting that we've discussed a lot about motor racing. We don't normally discuss this much. I'm waiting. If Nico Hulkenberg and Sophia Flörsch are the wake up calls, Hulkenberg shouldn't have been hanging on that barrier. That's a failure of the safety side of things, especially when the car caught fire. His accident, very low speed in F1 terms. Sophia Flörsch, until we get all the data back up from our car and the trackers on our car, we won't be able to tell if she had a throttle failure, which looks very, very likely, or a brake failure, which also could be very likely. But there were concerns that, she's coming hot. Okay, that's possibly an experience on that circuit from Sophia there. But the guy in front was responding to falsely rayed yellows, so stewarding as well. Macau is just waiting for that next big crash that kills someone. They had a couple last year in the motorbikes. I'm just waiting. Why don't they slow cars down the top speed? Well, some circuits you don't go onto the top range of the gearbox and the engine. So Monaco, you don't drive as fast. Got a lot of first and second gear corners. Other circuits like Le Mans, you can hit the engine limit. And we've seen supercars and single seaters do 200 plus down the main straights at Le Mans, Nürburgring as well. Most accidents don't happen at top end speed. Most accidents happen in the mid range. If you look at the Nürburgring accidents, most of those cars aren't going full throttle when they crash. It's to do with getting the line wrong, hitting that greasy patch, getting your exit from the previous corner wrong, running wide, and you're in the barrier. Most accidents happen in the mid range. We're talking 60 to 140 mile an hour, which any average road car could do. The top end accidents that happen at full throttle rarely happen. They are so rare that it's almost unheard of for a car to go top end and then talking 180 to 240 mile an hour, that kind of range. Those accidents at that top speed, they rarely happen. When they do, they are spectacular. Generally, the most dangerous accidents is when there's more than one car involved. So Sophia Flörsch, yes, there was other cars involved. She did hit another car. He was slowing down in the wrong place on the racing line. So that was a risk that both drivers could have been seriously injured, and both drivers who got to hospital to get checked. But no, most accidents happen in corners. not on straights, or coming on a very, and they normally happen flowing sections. Some circuit, you have to look at the circuits that we have to look at some circuits that are more dangerous than others. Macau is actually probably more dangerous than the Nürburgring. The Nürburgring is more famous for killing people, but Macau has that reputation. Of, I would say where they put that TV building, it was incorrectly placed completely. The barrier clearly failed. The barriers have to be tested to take a top end accident from a car. She was going at 176 and she went through it. You would think that they would have a bit more elasticity and give. The scary thing with some of these barriers, they do bounce you back out into the flow of traffic, which is a concern. I think people were questioning the television stand and that television block, that temporary block that was there. People were questioning his positioning before the race weekend started. So even before her accident, people were questioning that corner and the safety of that corner and that section. What we don't see is the section leading up to that corner and her accident. That's where we would definitely, be able to figure out what caused the crash. The fact she's ended up in the barrier is irrelevant now. It would happen to any driver in that situation. When a single seat gets airborne, it's uncontrollable. You have to pray for the best. We've seen a few of them in F1. We've seen Marcus Ericsson with his DRS failure, flipping, and how he walked out of that car, I will never know. Monza is a dangerous circuit. That's where his one happened, and he had a DRS failure, which is why I'm tightly against DRS, because when it fails and it sticks open, you are really in trouble. Marcus Ericsson, people slag him off, but to be fair, he had two really dangerous accidents this season, both of which weren't technically his fault. A mechanical failure and then almost being killed by Fernando Alonso's flying car kind of put that into perspective, how lucky he is to still be alive. People question the Halo device and how safe it actually is, but in this case, Marcus Ericsson wouldn't be alive without the Halo device. In both instances, the failure with his DRS is more terrifying to watch, and not many people talk about Marcus Ericsson's accident in qualifying with the DRS failure and he walking away at Monza. They're not talking about it, which is stunning. It's a device that a lot of fans don't like. A lot of experts are questioning how safe it is, and when it does fail, it can nearly kill you. So whether she's an aerodynamic failure as well, which has caused the car not to decelerate properly or whatever, we don't know. Until they release the full facts and figures of our accident, they may never do that. They may go, we'll keep it in-house and say, look, we'll make the changes to the vehicle necessary. But no, she is lucky. And yeah, she is also pretty fit. She's a skilled racing driver who also have to be exceptionally attractive. But no, she's exceptionally talented. The reason why they don't is to, lap record. I don't know about yeah, Fernando Alonso had an accident in Australia where he did correct a brake failure and avoid a bigger accident. Yeah, we've seen that. We've seen a lot of accidents that in previous years would have been more fatal. I've seen a lot of accidents at Spa, which make me feel really, really unwell. La Source, Oru, when they're, when they come through that section, you just want to shut your eyes half the time, because if you're slightly offline, you've had it. There have been some big ones. Nico Rosberg, when the tyre failed in his championship year, and he went into the barrier pretty hard up there. That was a cringe moment. Well, I forget who it was, and this is in the late 90s. It's the same year that Michael Schumacher had broken both his legs. I believe he was racing for the Prost or the Jaguar team, the driver, and he actually got buried in the barrier for a good period of time, and they were really terrified about getting him out. There was a near fatality in '99 at Spa. There was the big pile up on the start grid when it was raining, David Coulthard causing. I know about 5 cars got through that. Spa is one of the dangerous circuits. Spa is lethal. The fact we're now discussing purely motor racing now is brilliant. We don't normally discuss motorsport, and it's because I think motorsport as a sport, and all the various classes within that, there are there are a few issues. Champions Corner at Montreal has taken out so many. Talking about North American accidents, Indianapolis and Ralph Schumacher going backwards into the barrier at 180, 190 mile an hour with a tyre failure. That changed the landscape for F1 with the single tyre manufacturer because of that accident. This is a concern that I have with motorsport. It's a very reactionary sport. It's not proactionary. It doesn't bring in the changes before the accident. It waits for a serious accident and then makes the changes. Hence the Halo device. Is this the Halo device the best way to protect the cockpit of a single-seater race car? They're only doing it in F1. There's a reason why other single-seat motorsports don't have a Halo device. Would the Halo device would that have saved Felipe Massa from his head injury? Probably not. It would have body work would have still hit him in the helmet. So I don't know. I can't remember where Jack Villeneuve had his massive shunt and broke his back. Olivier Panis broke both his legs. So we are still seeing, even in the safer era of F1, drivers in the last 20 years have some horrific accidents. Yeah, I'm. Detroit was obviously before my time, but Nigel Mansell, yeah, he did have a big shunt in Detroit. And Detroit as a circuit was a horrible circuit, and I've heard nothing but negativity about it. Badly thought out street circuit in Detroit. I've seen a lot of interviews with Nigel Mansell, and he's given a lot of interviews, and he had a big shunt in the British touring car, so he retired from F1, and he went to the British touring cars with the Ford factory team, and he had a massive shunt at Donington, massive shunt, and took his teammate out as well, and I think he actually ended up hitting the bridge, the Donington Bridge. He went into that. He had a big shunt. Raikkonen at Silverstone when he hit the bridge at 180 mile an hour, and the car disintegrated. There have been some big ones. In not just F1 but in the top formulas of motorsport, big ones. And because of the safety level aspect now in motorsport, in the last 20-25 years, it's very rare that there's a fatality, but when it does happen, people are shocked. I'm sorry, but motorsport I would say 1995 was lethal. There were drivers dying daily in a variety of formula and a variety of motorsports across the world. The fact that the cars now are so inherently safe and the tracks are possibly too safe. We can debate the safety aspect of motor racing tracks. When a big serious accident results in serious injury or death happens, fans are automatically appalled. But they were more than happy to pre-95 watch, or pre-94, whenever Senna died. I can't remember when Senna died, was it 94 or 95? They were more than happy to watch, a race weekend knowing that there was a 1 in 5 chance of a driver dying. It's mad. And of course, the Simoncelli and the Jules Bianchi and these kind of incidents. How safe can you make motorsport without banning it? Like, honestly, the amount of money in motorsport that it brings to the world economy, we're treading on a slippery slope where we're going to have to. I would say accidents in motorsport are a part of learning. I went to school with a lad who was in karting. I don't know if he stayed on in motorsport at all. I don't know what actually happened to him in the end, but he was involved in go karting and obviously wanted to go up the levels of the sport. You're going to have accidents throughout your level of development or throughout your career. Even the greatest have had some massive, massive shunts and big ones. Sebastian Bourdais, he was an average F1 driver, but in IndyCar, he's an amazing driver in IndyCar. He's had some massive, massive accidents. Yeah, Niki Lauda. I don't know how he even knows. That season, there was a similar accident which killed a driver. He wasn't the only car involved in that accident. Hence why they don't go to the Nürburgring for the F1. Even though the Nürburgring has changed significantly since 1976, F1 went, no, we're going to react. We're not going to go here again. That's the issue with F1. They are reactionary. The FIA is reactionary. When an accident happens, they instead of being proactive and avoiding the problem, they wait till the problem happens. But how Lauda survived that, I have no idea. Absolutely no idea how he got out of that. I don't think even he even knows. it was the quick thinking of the other drivers around him. But he had raised concerns about that circuit not being suitable for the cars they were using that weekend in the drivers' meeting because he was chair of the drivers' meeting. Whatever you may think of Niki Lauda as a person, and he was raising concerns, and other drivers alongside him raised issues through him, and they were told to race. So he'd raised his point, but took it on the chin. Went, okay, we'll race, and then in that race, he ended up in a ball of flame. After I thought I'm going to have to look at the footage of his accident. I don't think it's not TV footage of his accident. It's the aftermath. You see the photos and footage of, but no one knows how he survived that. He's still having health issues even today. He's had, I think, another operation recently. He's very not well. Is Niki Lauda. He's had kidney issues, lung problems. He's lost hearing and heart. I think he's half deaf in one ear. He's had to have multiple bouts of plastic surgery. But 1976 was a year that changed a lot in motorsport. There was, I think, several fatalities that year. There were more to come in the 70s and the 80s and into the 90s, obviously, with Senna and Ratzenberger. Ratzenberg. And then there was nothing in F1 until Jules Bianchi and obviously him succumbing to his injuries sustained at Suzuka. So there was a good 20 odd years of nothing where, no drivers were killed. There were some serious injuries of drivers: Mika Hakkinen, Jacques Villeneuve, Barrichello landing on top of the barrier. That made me feel seriously ill. Schumacher breaking both his legs, Ralf Schumacher's accident, Olivier Panis's accident. There were some other big ones. Alonso's had a few. Fisichella at Interlagos. That was a big one. I had a scary one. Martin Brundle having 2 accidents at Melbourne in the same day because he got into the spare car and did exactly the same thing at the same corner at high speed. There have been some big shunts since the passing of Senna and drivers getting injured or walking away when they shouldn't have done. But they don't happen as much these days, and when they do, people are like really surprised that they happen. It's because they made the circuits too safe. Maybe that risk factor's been taken away somewhat. But there'll always be circuits like Spa and Monaco that when you do get it wrong, you end up in a barrier, but they're getting few and far between. But no, Niki Lauda, every time I see him interviewed on the F1 grid, I'm amazed that he's still alive. He's had a lot of surgeries. He's had a lot of health issues in relation to, obviously, the accident in '76. How he came back to race later, that's it. 3 months later, he was racing. So, within 3 months of being in a fiery death fire, he was back in the car racing, and he nearly won the F1 championship that year. So, yes, James Hunt also had his fair share of prangs as well, won the title that year. But it's one of them where that's the risk they take to be involved in the sport that they are involved in. But there's going to be a similar incident at some point where a driver is, but is going to be involved in an accident like that. But there are things they have changed. The driving, the safety suits have changed. They're far safer now for being fire retardant, giving a chance to get out the car. The hands device on the neck, supporting the neck in case of whiplash. They have made a lot of safety changes. You got the Ascari chicane. You got the first 2 chicanes in the Ascari chicane at Monza. They are lethal. Even when you're playing on a games console, I can never get them right without actually flipping the car on a games console where you're safe and you can replay and replay. You don't get that in real life. I've actually played on race simulators and Monza. I would rather take the chicanes out, but I know why they're there. But they sometimes change the angle of chicane as well. So the layout of the chicanes varies from season to season. If you go back into the 90s, the chicanes were different layout at Monza. So they do alter the chicane layouts at Monza. They have done. You can see the road markings where they've altered the chicanes where they keep the old tarmac. But no, Monza, those chicanes are lethal. Going into the Ascari chicane is yeah, oof, yeah, no. But Monza's a dangerous track. That's why the MotoGP doesn't go there because of fatalities. Again, reactionary. An accident's happened. It's claimed lives. We're not going here anymore. Um, it is a matter of time waiting to happen with a big shunt. Monza's a high speed circuit. It's mostly straights, so you are going full throttle a lot of the time. You're not. You do put a lot of energy on the brakes and the gearbox when you shift down and shift up. For the most part, uh, you are on the gas a lot of the time, full throttle, high gear. Tamburello, you want to, there are some big. It's a debate. Is Imola more dangerous or is Monza more dangerous? Monza's still in the F1 calendar. Imola is still in the Superbike calendar. So, which one's more lethal? Both circuits have killed top level drivers and racers and bikes and cars. So that debating point of which circuit's more dangerous in Italy is straight up there. It is what it is. I mean, Monza is a lethal circuit. It looks very simple when you look at Monza, the modern layout of Monza now, that they race in F1 and they race in superbikes and the World Touring cars. And you look at the Monza layout, it's an exceptionally simple circuit, but it's the amount of high speed you come down to low speed and the amount of time you have to get into that chicane before you just get it wrong on both chicanes is terrifying. It really is. But when you get it right at Monza, it's a beautiful sound. But when you get it wrong, it's a horrible accident. And yeah, Monza is a terrifying circuit. Monza's scary because it's such a simple circuit, but it's actually more technical than a lot of people realise as a circuit. And yeah, when you get it wrong, you get it seriously wrong, and you're in trouble. End of. And yeah, I don't like street. I mean, there's talk of a London street circuit as well when Silverstone loses his contract if they can't renew a contract at Silverstone. Um, there's too much road furniture. New York, oh, that would be a lot of sharp hairpins, not flowing corners because obviously the way it's a grid pattern in North America, we've seen it with Long Beach, we've seen it with Detroit. Those circuits are horrible. A street circuit, you put a temporary street circuit in. The modern style American grid pattern city street pattern. I don't know how if they're going to do it. If they did it in Manhattan, it would be mayhem. Um, God knows how they would do it. I don't even know how good the circuit would be. It'd be a lot of hairpins. So it'd be a lot of right angle corners, 90-degree corners. That would be. It would be interesting, but also very worrying. There'd be no runoff at all, none. Um, that would be exceptionally interesting. Look, you with Liberty Media now and them being an American company, I can see an American street race happening. Yes, I would have concerns about it myself, but F1 is not a sport that I enjoy anymore as in the motorsport formula. It's not one I enjoy. Uh, do I dislike street circuits? Not necessarily, but there are some street circuits that are not suitable. And would New York be a suitable street circuit layout? Probably not, because the amount of low speed, difficult overtaking spots where you have a low speed accident where a lot of cars will concertina in an accident, and then you have a blocked racetrack. I don't know that it would work, but someone's going to have to, would think of something and come up with an idea. So it's open to debate whether it will work or not. I don't think it will. I think I can see so many flaws with oh, why it was crap. Detroit, very similar to New York, grid pattern. That's how the street pattern works, on a grid pattern. And again, it was a nasty circuit. It wasn't well liked by the drivers. the best street circuit to look at in the US in recent times to give you a feel of recent street circuits is Long Beach, and that's recently. If you play Forza, you would have played the Long Beach circuit. Um, I would suggest look at the Long Beach circuit before you look at Detroit, and look how bad that was. Um, Even playing it on a games console, it's hard to avoid an accident at any corner on the Long Beach circuit. It's a horrible, horrible street circuit. Not very wide. Really, really dangerous layout. And the last corner is almost impossible to get round. You have to take the last corner in first gear. That has been pulled off the IndyCar calendar. Now, that's your best bet to look at a street circuit. Then you want to look at the Nürburgring Nordschleife. There are a couple of channels dedicated solely to the Nürburgring that actually have filming rights at the Nürburgring that they're given permission. That's another circuit to look at, and that is a race circuit and has the characteristics in sections of a street circuit with the narrowness and yeah, it's just purely terrifying. There's a reason why it's called the Green Hell. Um, so there are, and also Macau. If you want to see a street circuit that is lethal, look at a lap of the Macau street circuit, and you will see how bad it actually is, and it'll give you an idea of why Sophia Flörsch's accident took place. Um, there is no runoff, and you got to look at the just accidents at Macau, and you'll see why I don't like it. Not because I don't like the odd racing driver praying, the odd wheel going the barrier. I don't get me wrong, I like the odd praying. I find it makes it interesting. But when you've got 70% of the field involved in one accident and piling up into one corner, it's embarrassment. When like uh, oh yeah, the corkscrew. MotoGP. I remember Stefan Bradl and Mark Marquez were going to the corkscrew. Stefan Bradl was winning the race, and Mark Marquez just cuts the corkscrew. He just doesn't want to take it properly, and wasn't pulled back for that, and wasn't pinged for it. I don't know. I mean, I don't like the corkscrew is a challenge, but it's terrifying. And F1 Laguna Seca is there. You got Sonoma, you got Watkins Glen, you got Road America. There are several road circuits, they'll call them, track circuits that F1 could use in North America, and chooses to have this specialist built one in Austin, Texas, which is hideous. But they've been at Road America where Graham Hill had a hideous accident and was lucky to live. They've been to Watkins Glen, massive shunts there. When it goes wrong at the Glen, it's terrifying. Sonoma, they avoid Sonoma for some reason, even though it's a brilliant circuit. But again, when you get it wrong there, there's a few corners where if you get it wrong at Sonoma, you're in trouble. Laguna Seca just doesn't suit F1. The going to the corkscrew, I don't think the aero package would work. The cars will bottom out or take off, unless they did that corner in reverse and climb up and do it in a reverse. I don't know how they could do the corkscrew. It is a massive drop. I think it's like a 60-foot drop in two corners. I don't think the F1 cars with the aero packages they have now would be able to safely do that. Not at all. But it is what it is. Laguna Seca is one of my favourite circuits, but I think there's also sponsorship reasons why they don't go there, because it's sponsored by Mazda. In fact, I think it's owned by Mazda now as their test track. And whether Mazda will give them permission to race there is again another question mark, considering that Mazda isn't involved in F1, and it is. Oh, there's some school kids fighting outside my house. Anyway, I'm gonna get going there. If you want to see a couple of tracks that I'm like going, this track is lethal: Nürburgring, Nordschleife, Macau GP, and yeah, check out the Detroit one, but Long Beach as well. Long Beach is an interesting one, and St. Petersburg, Florida. That's an IndyCar circuit, that street circuit where they have the occasional big prang that I shut my eyes at. So there's a couple of street circuits in the US and Macau in China. I suggest check them out, and that will give you an idea of some of the most lethal circuits in the world, which have the highest risk attached to them. Macau, I think, is probably the most dangerous circuit right now, with the amount of high-profile accidents that have resulted in serious injury. Although Nürburgring kills more people, but it's again, it's subjective. Uh, I can get the corkscrew right, rarely, but I give up. I just I just give up at that point. I don't find Forza fun anymore. I really don't. I got bored of Forza a long time ago. So, but there we go. Anyway, we'll leave that there. Appreciate all the questions. It's really interesting to talk about motorsport so heavily on a live stream. We don't do that often, so I appreciate the conversation we've had to do with motorsport. It's really nice, and I'll have more topics to discuss later on. So I shall see you later. Appreciate all the questioning, and if you missed the beginning, which you didn't because you were at the beginning, you obviously know what happened. But really interesting discussion point. And I like talking about motorsport. It gets rarely spoken about on this channel, and for the most part, I I don't really talk about motorsport much on this channel unless it's something seriously egregious. But we'll see how Robert Kubica does in F1 next year, and we'll see the direction that Liberty Media take it in with the new regs coming in. So, cheers for watching, and I will see you soon. Da, 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 da.